Rabbi Barbara Aiello is the first and only woman rabbi in Italy, where she serves congregation Ner Tamid del Sud, the Eternal Light of the South, the first active synagogue in Calabria in 500 years since Inquisition time. The synagogue is a member of the Reconstructionist Jewish movement and welcomes Jews of all backgrounds, including interfaith and no-traditional families, patrilineal Jews, B'nai Anosim, and crypto-Jewish Italians who are discovering and embracing their Jewish roots. Rabbi Barbara is a graduate of Indiana University of Pennsylvania, where she received the Distinguished Alumni Award. She holds an MS from the George Washington University and received rabbinic ordination from the Rabbinical Seminary International and the Rabbinical Academy in New York City. Rabbi Barbara is an internationally featured lecturer who was invited to present her work at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., and at the United Nations Special Committee on Religious Pluralism. She was awarded the Surgeon General's Medallion for Excellence in Public Health by Dr. C. Everett Koop, and she serves Kulanu as member of its executive board and also chair of our fundraising committee. I'm delighted to introduce Rabbi Barbara. Oh, I have one more housekeeping thing to tell you, which is that in the upper right of your screen, you can choose whether to view in speaker view or gallery view. One way the speaker gets big, and the other way you can see everybody and scroll from one screen to another. We're up to 45 participants. Amazing. Okay, so wait, Rabbi Barbara, I need to unmute you, or you could unmute yourself. There, we got you unmuted. No, we did it at the same time. Try it. You unmute yourself, I won't touch it.
How's that?
That's beautiful.
Everyone can hear me? I have to compliment you, Harriet, you're a techno wizard. Thank you so much for setting up this meeting, for inviting me and allowing me to share our work in Italy as a Kulanu community. It is a real joy to be here and to be a part of this very important meeting. I want to tell you a little bit. First of all, I want to say shalom and benvenuti a tutti. Welcome to everyone. I am so pleased that so many of you are joining with us. And I want to tell you a little bit about our community through the eyes of a young man I met just not very long ago. His name was Luigi. Not long ago, shortly before the coronavirus took hold in Italy, this young man tapped on the door of our synagogue. He was dressed in work clothes. He wore heavy-duty work boots, and he began speaking, as most Italians would do in a similar situation, to apologize for his appearance, as he had just come from the job site. He said his name was Luigi, and he said that he works for the comune, which is the Italian word for the municipality, and his job was shoring up the walls of abandoned houses. On this particular day, he was working on a 300-year-old house, and Luigi urged me to come with him as he had something to show me. C'è qualcosa ebraico lì. C'è qualcosa ebraico lì. Andiamo. There's something Jewish there, Luigi said. We must go, which was just enough for me to grab my coat and to follow him to the courtyard of this abandoned house, where beneath the crumbling terracotta was amazingly a perfectly preserved blue mosaic of the Magen David, the Star of David. This discovery took place right here, where I'm speaking to you, from where I'm speaking to you in the mountains of Calabria. And because we are a B'nai Anosim community, in that the majority of our 82 members are descendants of Jews who were forced into adult Christian baptism nearly 500 years ago during Inquisition times, Luigi's discovery was one of many that I've seen during my 17 years here in the most isolated region of Italy. Our roots run deep, and some of you posed questions earlier about our connection with Spain, and our roots do run deep all the way back to Spain, where the persecution and expulsion of the Jews began and continued, as many of you know, through Portugal, Sicily, the Aeolian island chain, and the island of Sardinia. And then, as the Inquisition authorities continued to chase us, we ran through the Italian mainland, specifically the toe, foot, and the ankle of the Italian boot. But as Inquisition authorities destroyed Jewish life, burning holy books, stealing Torah scrolls, closing Jewish schools and synagogues, and reconfiguring them to become churches, and then forcing Jews under threat of torture and death to accept Christian baptism, amazingly, Jewish life moved from public to private. How did that happen? Well, we Jews took our traditions into our kitchens, into our cantinas, our basement rooms, practicing in secret as conversos, marranos, and crypto Jews. So my work as a rabbi here is to help Calabrians discover and embrace their lost and stolen Jewish traditions, a heritage that is indeed rightfully theirs. My colleagues, they call me investigatrice, an investigator, helping families recover their Judaism and offering them a synagogue and a cultural center where they can feel comfortable, accepted, and respected as authentic Jews. That's why the coronavirus has been particularly devastating to us here in the Calabrian mountains. So much of my work is person to person, face to face. Hands-on contact characterizes it. And much like my experience with Luigi and his Magen David discovery, my rabbinic work depends on my connecting with our locals, viewing their precious Jewish artifacts, and helping them to confirm their Jewish origins, something that was only whispered about in many Calabrian families for generations. Now, however, with the coronavirus lockdown, these opportunities for personal contact are on hold. That's the psychological effect of the coronavirus. The practical aspect has been difficult as well. When our local priest, Don Antonio, and I were asked to post signs that our houses of worship were closed, we both knew we had to face this challenge, and together we discussed ways to spring into action. Now, Don Antonio is a young priest. He's young enough to be my grandson. And with the prodding of youth, he encouraged me to try Facebook Live to present our Passover Seder. And thanks to Don Antonio, who reminded me that every year I offer the Hamashi Seder, a gathering that has its roots in the time of the Inquisition, when Christian families were appalled that their Jewish neighbors could not observe Pesach. Amazingly, these Christians offered Jewish families a room in their own home so that Jews could hold a secret Seder on an off night when their persecutors would not be spying on them. Each year, our Hamashi Seder, you can see a picture of the one we did last year, has welcomed local Christians to our table as a way to honor their ancestors who at great personal peril offered us the opportunity to observe. Make your Hamashi Seder on Facebook, Don Antonio urged. I will show you how. So I put aside my techno-klutz tendencies and broadcast our virtual Sephardic Seder. Rabbis throughout Italy report that we are quarantined in our synagogues, and no thanks to the coronavirus, we are all alone in our shuls. This is especially true for me, especially since we maintain our synagogue through a distance learning bar and bat mitzvah program that brings families to our synagogue in our village, which is called Serra Stretta. These families are from the United States, Canada, Great Britain, and Australia. They come to share their simcha with our congregation, and some of our congregants will travel 5 or 6 hours to show their Anosim sons and daughters that they too will one day read from the Torah, as this young man is doing who came to us from Toronto. This year, with travel restrictions and general disruption throughout Italy, all of our families have canceled, resulting in the inevitable economic repercussions, but also the social consequences for our own congregants who anticipate meeting, sharing, and learning with our international visitors. Our synagogue is a recognized affiliate member synagogue of the Reconstructionist movement, a credential that is so meaningful to us in that we are one of only 4 Jewish communities in all of Italy that offers a modern, liberal, and inclusive approach to Judaism. We are open and welcoming to Jews of all backgrounds, and we actively blur denominational lines. Our motto is labels are for the jelly jars, not the Jews. But even more important, we are a Kulanu community in that we can engage with this wonderful international organization that recognizes that isolated and emerging Jewish communities offer a unique opportunity for the growth and health of worldwide Judaism. Thanks to Kulanu, donors have sent us things our congregants and our conversion candidates need in order to fully experience Jewish life. So we are so very grateful when we receive Shabbat, Havdalah, and Hanukkah candles, sets of tefillin for use by both men and women, Chinet Seder plates, matzah covers, some handmade by first graders, and Judaica such as kippot, telitot, kiddush cups, and Shabbat candelabras, items that many of us so lovingly can pass on in our families, lador vador, from generation to generation. But for many B'nai Anusim, who centuries later are only recovering their tradition, these items are especially precious because they represent the lost links in our newly forged Jewish chain. And more kudos to Kulanu for their support of our distance learning Jewish studies program. We offer online classes to students in remote parts of Italy, the interior of Sicily, the islands of Lipari and Panarea, the small villages in Puglia, as well as to students whose work prohibits regular in-person class attendance. Our 2020 conversion class of 12 candidates includes 3 first responders in Salerno, a pediatric nurse on the island of Sardinia, a disabled man in Naples, and a nursing home CEO in Genova, all of whom studied at their own pace, met with me via Skype for 2 hours each month, and after a year of study and practice, these candidates will come here to our synagogue for an in-person Beit-Din, and there you have it, followed by a mikveh in the Mediterranean Sea. And that is where we are. That is where we are, not too far from our synagogue, and we're having kiddush on the beach. We usually do our mikveh early morning, very, very early in the morning. This was about 7 a.m., and we do this every year. This year it will be August 23rd, 24th, and 25th. So the question is, has the coronavirus changed our Jewish life here in Italy? Well, from the devastation of the epidemic that began in northern Italy, if you've been following the news, I'm sure you've seen it, to its emergence here in the south, the answer, unfortunately, is yes, it has. For the hardest hit communities in Milan and its surrounding cities of Brescia and Bergamo, the tahara, the Jewish ritual for preparing a body for burial, has been prohibited. And in some areas, in-ground graves are no longer available, so cremation becomes the only option. Shiva is virtual, and sadly, many have died alone. Here in the South, we've maintained community solidarity in a way that is so uniquely Italian. At 6 p.m. every evening, we open our windows or we stand on our balconies and we sing Fratelli d'Italia, the Italian national anthem, followed by Ebbenu Shalom Alechem, and wrapped up with Volare. Oh, the rainbow sign of hope that I've seen in the US started right here in Italy. Our school children made these wonderful posters. I think we have a picture coming. There it is. Yes, that is Vittoria, and she's holding our poster. And our kids brought them to each family to post on their front door. Andrà tutto bene, which means everything will be okay. Thank you so much for allowing us to share Synagogue Ner Tamid in our community with all of you. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Molly, did you want to field some questions?
Yes, thank you so much, Rabbi Barbara. That was
Mhm.
very, very informative, and I feel like everyone learned a lot about your community, and thank you so much for sharing. So we wanted to have people ask questions via the chat box. So if you go down to the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see a chat icon pop up. And there you can type in your question, and I will read those. But we're going to start with a few that came in prior to today's talk. The first one being, has there been an increase in anti-Semitism that you've seen in your community, Rabbi Barbara?
Not in our community, and I am so grateful that I have such a supportive parish priest. Uh, Prior to the Inquisition, 50% of the southernmost region of Italy, the Calabria region, which is the geographical size of the state of Virginia, was 50% before the Inquisition were people who had a Jewish background. And so many of the people who live in our town know that 400 and 500 years ago, they had Jewish roots. The priest, the previous priest who was here when I arrived 17 years ago, his last name was Aiello, which is a very commonly recognized Jewish surname in the South. And he said, you know, if I had been brought up Jewish and if I had known we were Jewish, I probably would have been a rabbi. But I always was drawn to the spiritual life, and I became a priest. And throughout the years, he took mixed groups of our congregants and his congregants to Israel, and very, very supportive, and just a very wonderful man. Don Antonio, during in the aftermath of the shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, mentioned to me, and we both had spoken about the fact that many people who emigrated from Italy to the United States went to Pittsburgh. And he said, you know, there are many people who have relatives in the town, and of course you are from there. Let's do a memorial service in honor of those who were killed. We sent out invitations, and we got so much response that we had to move it out of our little synagogue. You saw the picture of our synagogue, that's 45 seats, and we moved it into the church. And the Jewish Federation in Pittsburgh wanted a video of it, and they wanted to be able to show the Italian American Club and the Tree of Life Synagogue, which was we were very happy to do. But anti-Semitism is on the rise in Europe, and it comes from both ends of the spectrum, the far left and the far right. The enemy of my enemy is your friend, is my friend. And what we're seeing now is in France is where the majority of anti-Semitic remarks on social media and other anti-Semitic activity has taken place. Someone asked earlier, or through, I believe, wrote us a question about the development of a coronavirus in Israel, and if that, somehow or another that sparked anti-Semitism. In France it has, not in Italy, but in France, with some people writing that the Jews created the coronavirus so that they could make money developing a vaccine and selling it, selling it around the world. In Italy, interestingly enough, we deal with the blood libel at this time of the year. It always rears its ugly head. And this year, an artist by the name of Giovanni Gasparo painted a 7-foot by 5-foot painting of a ritual murder of a baby by obviously stereotypical Jewish men. And immediately the Jewish communities, the larger communities north of me from Naples and north, Rome, Torino, Milan, and Venice, wrote about it and were disgusted by it and created quite a stir. But what was probably most remarkable this year was that an archbishop in a northern city, his name is Bishop Spreafico, he denounced it. He denounced it as clearly anti-Semitic behavior against the Jews, and that was very good to see. Um, uh, I am located in the town of my ancestors. My family was one of the founding families, the five Jewish families who founded this town, and I live in a house that's been in my family for 400 years. So I share that with you by way of explaining that I have come back here to a town where my family is well known. If I were to have gone somewhere else, might there have been some backlash toward me as a Jew? I can't really say for sure, but I have to say that being here, definitely not. Oh, I tell you one other thing. We got a new bishop in the big city called La Mezzia Terme, about 23 kilometers away. And when he came to speak to at the local parish church, he met the dignitaries were all together and introduced, and I was very fortunate to be introduced as well. And he came over to me and he said, "When this is over, I want to see the synagogue." And it was really nice. So yeah, so I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
We have another question that just came into the chat about B'nai Anusim. Is there a way to verify whether ancestors named Pinto, P-I-N-T-O, were Anusim? It's such a major Jewish name in Jewish Morocco.
Oh, absolutely. I have some of my family comes from Morocco, and there is an Aiello there as well. Aiello is my own name, and there is an Aiello there, one of the founding members of the Marrakesh community, a descendant of, I should say. And the name Pinto is a very prominent Jewish name, primarily in Milan, but it originates in the south. And the reason that I know this is because our cultural center offers a surname research. We have people who come to us, and our clients ask us to research whether or not the surnames of the Italian surnames in their family have Jewish roots. And so we use primary and secondary sources going all the way back to Spain and Portugal, and we trace the name. We do not do a bloodline, and we also tell our clients that for those who are hoping to get a right of return citizenship in Spain or Portugal, that DNA results are not accepted, but our research reports are. And why might that be? That people did not move back in the day, 500 years ago, unless they were forced to. So when we can trace a name in Spain to Portugal to Sicily to Sardinia to my area here, that's a very, very strong indication of Jewish roots. Also, we examine tax records, which for a name like Pinto I would do, and if whenever a Pinto was married, if they had to pay a tax that was in excess of the normal marriage tax, that was an indication of a Jewish background, because Jews had to pay more money in order to have their marriages registered. And there are many other examples I could give you, but those are just two of the most important.
Thank you. We have another question from the chat. Is there a way in which your community can particularly use support from abroad right now?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. We, as I mentioned, we had a very strong and active bar and bat mitzvah program, where we advertise that we provide a very unusual and unique experience for the young man or young woman who is called to the Torah as a bar or bat mitzvah. And it is an opportunity to see that there are places in the world where it's not easy to be Jewish. And it is overwhelming to some of our families when they see, especially girls, reading from the Torah, because except for the our four Jewish communities, girls cannot read from the Torah in the majority of synagogues in Italy. And when a family, for example, sees another family of their roughly own age bringing their two daughters, driving 7 hours to come to a bat mitzvah, so that they can show their daughters that yes, indeed, you can read from the Torah too. It is just remarkable, and all of that activity has been canceled. All of it. That's how we maintain the synagogue. And we had a huge storm. I guess it was a uragano. It was like a hurricane, a tornado, in not too long ago, and we can't fix the roof. It is during our season we are able to gather the money that our visitors uh, pay to us for the experience in the synagogue, and we don't have anybody coming at all. We even have there is news today, just a few hours ago, that the European Union is considering barring all travel between the Schengen countries, the original 25 European Union countries, through September. And that's going to mean that some of our last bar and bat mitzvah families will probably not be able to come. So yes, and then the other thing I would say is that we are always looking for Judaica, and that's because people who are just recovering their Jewish roots don't have the opportunity that so many of you have to receive a talit that's been passed along in the family, or Shabbat candles that your great grandmother used. Some of them will bring me something, and I'm able to tell that it was once a Jewish item. But for the most part, these people are building their Jewish treasure trove, and they are creating what will be memories for their children. And so when our next group of converts come, to be able to give everyone a set of Shabbat candles, everyone a Seder plate. I mean, these are remarkable gifts to be able to give them as they do the practical work of creating a Jewish home. And that's what we try to do with our conversion program. We teach people how to create a Jewish home. There are very few Judaica shops in Italy, and ordering things is very, very tough. Amazon does not deliver to the door. I mean, there are just all kinds of complications. So that's what we need.
Right. And Harriet wrote in the chat, in order for people to reach out to, can they email you directly at rabbi@rabbibarber.com?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
We'd be
great.
happy to hear from you. I hope that you'll come and visit Italy. Those of you who maybe have visited before, but mostly did the northern tier. Calabria is Italy's best kept secret, and hopefully when all of this passes by and people will join us again, we hope that will happen.
Wonderful. And we also have another note in the chat as well, that Kulanu accepts in-kind donations, and we can pass those out to our partner communities. So you can email kulanucoordinator@gmail.com for that as well. I have another question from the chat that has come in. How much is the current Pope doing to counter anti-Semitism? He seems bent on countering anti-Islamic bigotry, as did his predecessor, but stats show that Islam is a major contributor to current waves of anti-Semitism, and the latter is much more serious than the former.
Yes, indeed. Pope Francis is very much appreciated by people here in the South because he came to visit. That did not happen very often. I don't think it happened at all with the previous Pope, and I think but of course the Pope that fought hardest and was most effective against anti-Semitism was Pope John Paul II, the Polish Pope. Of course, it could be because his mother's name was Emily Katz, you know, and and he played on a Jewish soccer team, and his grandparents, all four grandparents, lived to a ripe old age, but they never spoke to each other. And sounds like that might have been an interfaith family issue, seems to me. Many people believe so. Pope John Paul II also was the first pope to visit a synagogue, and he visited the Tempio Maggiore, the great synagogue in Rome. But Pope Francis did as well, and but he has not been as vocal as nor was Pope Benedict either, as Pope John Paul II was. However, he is very open-minded, very welcoming from what I can see, and and slow to criticize and slow to act. That's good and bad. That can be good and bad. I wish he would speak out more against anti-Semitism, but he has visited with Rabbi de Segni, who is the chief rabbi of Rome, and he has visited the synagogue and spoke out against the murder of Signora Halevi, who was the elderly woman thrown from a balcony from her apartment in France. And there was a big memorial service for her, at which the Pope also attended.
Thank you. I have another question about family lineage from the chat. We think my partner's family could have been Jewish. They were from Calabria. How can we search from here in the United States? The name is Sario, S-A-A-R, and Shapiro, S-C-H-I-R-I-P-O.
Ah, very interesting. Well, send me an email and I'll tell you what you can do. And there are some resources that you can check. If you look on my website at Italian Jewish Roots, you'll see a collection of some of the literally thousands of surnames that we know have a Jewish connection. And write me and let me know. And I always like to know not only the name, but I like to know the name of the wife and what her surname was, because there was a practice among the Jews of southern Italy to recognize each other by name, so that they could make the shidduch. So they could make the marriage, the match. And it was very interesting because people have come to me with surnames like Lo Spirito and Cristiano. And one girl, young girl, Patrizia, came to me. She said, I know our family's Jewish. My grandmother put 2 candles on the table on a white tablecloth every Friday night. She never went to church, and on. She explained a number of different traditions. But people tell me we can't be Jewish when they hear my surname. I said, what was your surname? She says, Aiutami Cristo, help me Christ. And she said, how can that possibly be a Jewish name? I said, that is the strongest indication that you have, because when people were forced into Christian conversion, many times they created a surname for themselves to keep the Inquisition at a distance. Like we are literally more Catholic than the Pope. And so names like Lo Spirito and Cristiano and Gentile and Santo and Sacro and Aiutami Cristo are all indications of what we call Marranos or Conversos surnames.
Thank you for sharing. Very interesting. Are there Ashkenazi Jews in Calabria and in the rest of Italy, or only Sephardic?
Well, there were back in the day 3 cultural groups of Judaism. There were the Ashkenazi, the Sephardic, and the Italkite. The Italkite were the very first Jews in the diaspora with a culture different from the Sephardic culture, and obviously different from the Ashkenazi culture as well, which we find in the northern part of Italy. That's where the Ashkenazi families generally are found, at the border towns of Austria, Germany, Switzerland, France, and the Sephardic names and Sephardic people with Sephardic heritage are down here in the toe of the boot. But the Italkit were the very first ones, and when did they get here? Well, we're the first Jews in the diaspora and the only Jews who went somewhere not under duress. They chose where they wanted to settle. And they go all the way back to the time of the Maccabees, the Hanukkah story, when the Jews were losing the battle against the Assyrians, and so the leadership decided to fill a boat full of soldiers, of Maccabee soldiers, and try to they set them afloat and tried to find people that they could hire as mercenary soldiers. Well, they had no GPS, and so the boat is floating along to the toe of the Italian boot. And as these soldiers who come from a hot, dry country see the mist rising from the toe of the boot of Italy, they exclaim, Aitalia. Ai in Hebrew means island, because they thought it was an island down there at the toe of the boot, didn't realize that it was attached way far north. Tal, the Hebrew Tal, the Hebrew word for dew, D-E-W, the mist or dew. Yah, one of the very first names of God that we find in the Bible, in Psalm 64 and other places. And so they exclaimed, Aitalia, and they stayed and they never went back. They also named Italy, as you can see, Aitalia. And so they brought with them a culture from Judea that became the Italkit culture. But because then when the Sephardic Jews grew in numbers from Spain, Portugal, Iberian Peninsula, and like that, they were absorbed into the Sephardic culture. And so that's why now we say there are two groups. But DNA testing is amazing. My husband's last name is Mascaro, and his family traces back to Spain. A rabbi is in his lineage who was a colleague of Spinoza, and so he had his DNA tested, and guess what? He's got all this Ashkenazi DNA. How did that happen? We don't know.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I have another question from the chat. It says, I learned reading Renee Melamede's research how much women's home traditions maintain Judaic practice with the Inquisition. Signs of that are in your community in southern Italy, correct? Can you please share a few?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because when we read the historians of southern Italy, Scaramuzzino is one of the major ones. He writes that when established Judaism was wiped out during Inquisition times, Judaism was wiped out. Now, he did not make that statement as an anti-Semite. He, not being Jewish himself and not digging any further, never realized that when our synagogues were usurped by the church and turned into Catholic churches, that we took our traditions into our homes. We took them to the family table. We took them by putting a niche on the doorpost, and rather than putting a mezuzah up because that would be too dangerous, we would put up a little statue of one of the angels from the Torah, Gabriel, Michael, and with a sword pointing inward, which was a way of indicating where the mezuzah would have been. Lots and lots of traditions like that, like the person I told you, Patrizia, who was whose grandmother put a white tablecloth every Friday night on the table and lit 2 candles. But if you were to ask people, and I do this all the time, and when I first got here, I asked the wrong questions. I would say to people, do you think you're Jewish? And they would say, no, I don't think so. But then I realized I wasn't asking the proper question. I started to say, what do you do when babies are born? Oh, we put a red string on the crib, or we put it on the carriage. Of course, that comes from the Kabbalah. What do you do at coming of age? What do you do for weddings and for funerals and for mourning? And people would start to tell me all of these at-home traditions as the questioner. as the questioner described. That is how the spark of Judaism, that's why we call our synagogue Ner Tamid Del Sud, the eternal light of the South, the little flame that could never be extinguished. And part of the reason that flame stayed alive was the women who took the traditions and kept them alive in their homes.
Great. So I have another question from the chat.
Mm-hmm.
What would visitors to your community experience if they don't have children going through the B'nai Mitzvah process, or even any children at all with them traveling?
Many people come and visit, and they are adults alone. Excuse me, I'm going to take a little sip of water here. There we go. And what I like to do is I like to meet them in the bigger town that, as I said, is about 23 kilometers away, called Lametzia Terme. And I like to take them on a walking tour. And we take a 15-minute tour to the old Jewish quarter in the old town area, Centro Storico, the old center city, called Nicastro. And there is a plaque is placed on the entrance to this area called Timpone. Timpone is the Italian word for ridge. And it was during the time of King Frederick II who protected the Jews, because they brought the silk trade and the dyeing of indigo and weaving and decorative wrought iron decorations, especially making of balconies, to that area. King Frederick II protected the Jews because they brought such economic prosperity to the area. And so I like to show people the area where the silkworms were grown and where the weaving was done. And when people come to our town, one of the interesting things I like to show them are the two remaining walls of the original synagogue. It became a Catholic church, obviously, when the Inquisition made its way up here. It is not our synagogue because the entire building was destroyed in the earthquake of 1905. And the only two walls remaining. But on the hill above these two walls, we find an opening in the earth, and the 3 steps down and then the 3 steps up, which clearly was the mikveh at one time. Most of the mikvahot were made on high ground, so that the pure rainwater would be collected and not make its way down the mountain before become polluted. I also like to show people the doors of our parish church, the Catholic Church, which are huge plates, beautiful wrought iron sculpted plates, and they are not religious in nature. They show folk dancing, picking of chestnuts, weaving, silk weaving, carpentry, nothing religious. And since 5 Jewish families founded this town, this was a way of kind of keeping traditions alive and hiding in plain sight. And when we go inside the church, one of the most interesting things to see is to look straight up, right over the heads of the faithful is Moses holding the 10 Commandments with paintings of the prophets circling all around. Once again, the Jews were hiding in plain sight, and it's kind of remarkable to see. When we have a lot of time, we visit some nearby towns. There's a woman who does weaving, and she weaves the Genestra plant, which I believe in English you call broom. And it's a very stiff and fibrous plant that the women of Spain, the Jewish women of Spain, brought with them this craft all the way to our area. And there's a woman who does weaving and demonstrates some of this craft, which she learned goes back, I think, 5 or 6 generations at least in her family. So there's a lot to see, a lot to talk about, and they're all wonderful people to meet. Not to mention Zio Mario, Uncle Mario, our oldest congregant. He's 84 years old. Someone asked him in the coffee bar recently, why do you go to the synagogue? Why do you go? He says, because I sing with the rabbi. And his friend said, how do you know any of those words? He says, they're in my heart.
So I have one more question. We'll see. This might be our last question. We'll see if anything else comes in. How
Okay.
many Jewish communities are there in southern Italy? Are there any historic popular Jewish sites there as well?
There are some, not many. We are the only active synagogue in Calabria in 500 years since the Inquisition times. There are buildings that are churches that I can identify as synagogues, because we have two people in our cultural center, a demographer and an archivist, who help. We travel around together and help me do that. We have found Jewish evidence of Judaism, street names, old signs, number of different things in 203 villages in the from the ankle to the toe of the boot. One of the most important places to visit is Bova Marina. It is the archaeological excavation site of what would be the second oldest synagogue after Ostia in all of Italy. And there is a museum there and a tour that is available by reservation only. And then of course there's Ferramonte, which is worth seeing. It is in Cosenza, about 45 minutes from where I'm speaking to you from. And it was a concentration camp. 4,000 Jews were interned there, and Italian villagers and local villagers and Italian soldiers saved the lives of all 4,000 Jews. It's a wonderful story surrounding it. And we take tour groups there, and there's a woman who lives in Tel Aviv by the name of Judith Yitzhak, and we bring her back here every other year. She was born in Ferramonte. Her family stayed there 5 years, 2 years after the liberation, because they felt safe. And she recalls going for ice cream with the commandant in the sidecar of his motorcycle, and living with her parents and cultivating a vegetable garden. And it is a remarkable story about what the Italians did to protect Italian Jews, and also Jews from other parts of Europe who had come into Italy as the last open border before Mussolini aligned with Hitler.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
So I think we should wrap up now. I wanted to see if you had some final thoughts to share.
Me?
Sure. Yes, Rabbi Barbara.
Are you talking to me?
We also have one question that just came in about if there are any authors or anyone that from your area that people should look into reading to learn a little bit more.
You can read Elizabeth Bettina's book, It Happened in Italy. I was a consultant on that book, and it's quite good. I wrote a book called The Cat That Ate the Cannoli, and it is about a cat. It is about all of it's short stories of the people here and a lot of our work here. A cat really did eat a cannoli. There was a young girl who was about to read from the Torah. She started to do her blessing, and as
Rabbi Barbara just froze. Are you back, Rabbi Barbara? No. We'll just give it a minute. You know, if not, Molly, can you put her pitch on the screen and I will read it for her?
Yes, give me one moment to find it.
Okay, I'm Harriet Bograd, president of Kulanu, for those of you who weren't there at the very beginning. And the next thing that was going to come was Rabbi Barbara's pitch. And I'm so sorry, she does it better than I do. But I will stand in for her if she looks like she just got disconnected. So Molly, you're going to find it.
I will share my screen.
So before we say goodbye, I want to take the time to personally thank all of you for your donations to Kulanu over the years. Your continued support has meant so much to all of our Kulanu communities. In these challenging times when we can't be sure what turns the what turns the economy will take. Your support is needed now more than ever. Each community has immediate needs, and some of these needs are of an emergency nature. And we also need to continue to support our wonderful staff so that they can sustain Kulanu through this year and going forward. We thank you in advance for whatever you can do to ease these financial burdens. Thank you, or as one of our congregants, 83-year-old Uncle Mario says, I can't pronounce this, Toda Rabbissimo a tutti. Many thanks to all of you. You can close that now. Molly, will you unshare the screen? Thank you. So now I want to do a little housekeeping and then move us into breakout groups where we can visit with each other. Again, our prototype is parlor meetings we've had in my living room. And after we have any kind of formal program, there's always cake and cookies and hummus and crackers and cheese, and you get to visit with different people and make the connections that make Kulanu so wonderful. Talk to old friends you know, talk to people you're meeting for the first time, and help build this as a community. So in a few minutes, we're going to break into breakout groups, a wonderful feature of Zoom that I've just been learning, and this is the first time we're using it for Kulanu. When we get to our breakout groups, I'll ask you to quickly identify one person as leader. We'll give you a question to discuss and simply divide up the 15 minutes among the people in your group. So each person has a turn speaking. After 15 minutes, we will give you 60 seconds warning, and then we will regroup. We will have Zoom shuffle us around so we're with a new group for a second question, and we'll do that again, and then we'll all come back. If you've run out of time and need to say goodbye now, we're so glad you were here, and we'll of course understand if you need to go. But if you'd like to stay for the breakout groups, that's part of my, I mean, nothing could be what Rabbi Barbara just did, but the direct communication with each other is such an important part of Kulanu.